Ladies and gentlemen, hello, welcome back once more. It's another episode of Professor Drew's Lab. The questions this week are going to be a bit on the spoiler side, so if you are not fully caught up with the Tater Tots adventure, you might want to circle back, catch this one when you are, because I'm going to be just sort of discussing moments left, right, and center based on some of the questions that have come in. So again, final spoiler warning, I'll put it everywhere that I can. But now that you've been warned, let's jump right on into it. Trevor Tube is going to start us off today. Do we know what the limit is to what Ambrosia can cure? Like, could the Tots have saved Klaus, or was it too late? I know there is some sort of rule with death, but I'd appreciate a clarification on the whole thing, as it's now coming into play with the past few sessions. So let's tackle this in bits. What does the Ambrosia do? Ambrosia cures all poison and diseases. It can regrow limbs. It can do all manner of incredible things. If you're familiar with like all of the high-level healing spells from 5th edition D&D, it is pretty much all of those baked into one. However, it cannot revive a creature that has been dead longer than 10 days. So to kind of clue that into the second aspect of your question, could the Tots have saved Klaus? No. Klaus dropped to 0 hit points and failed his last death save before he went into the box. All of that time dilation does mean he was gone for much, much longer than 10 days. So, as sad as it is to say, our poor boy never stood a chance. Thankfully, the Tots elected to not burn an Ambrosia on Klaus so that we didn't have to have that incredibly awkward discussion about how they had just wasted one of these Ambrosias. So as sad as it is, poor Klaus, he was sort of gone from the moment he went into the box. Going on from here, Logan S. has a question here. I love hearing about all these custom stat blocks you've made for Pokemon. Would you ever release them on the Patreon or the Discord? Would love to see some of the super homebrewed ones like Crash and Chicky Bee and how they function mechanically. There is a similar question from I Need Cash. It says, do you plan on releasing the Pokedex you've made? Just curious. I've been working on making a campaign and statting the mons has been fun, but I wanted to know if you'd post them. So the long and short of this is we're never going to put out a full-on like Pokedex for the Tots, specifically not the ones on their teams, and more than likely not just a whole list of stat blocks. We're not going to put out any sort of like monster manual or handbook of how to run the games the way that we do, because for those of you that have watched the prior lab videos, we've kind of gone pretty in-depth on that. Now, there is a caveat to this. Some folks in our Discord will be aware we have been fiddling around with making some sort of like stat cards for various team members and NPCs. We don't have a solid plan of what to do with them just yet, but it is an idea that has crossed our minds. So I will let you guys know we are considering it. We're taking it slow. We're making sure that we do it right, and it definitely won't be for everything, but we are looking into that just a little bit. Moving on from here, Sunny Day has a question about campaign timing. We are sort of gearing up for a big battle with the Tots, and it feels like an end is coming. Should I be preparing to say goodbye to the Tots in the near future, or is there more in store for the campaign after this hurdle? That is really up to the Tots. There's not a whole lot that I can say here because I don't want to spoil things that haven't happened yet. But the thing to keep in mind, the thing I've sort of alluded to in a couple places, but the Tots have 60 in-game days and counting to go through to do things. So it's not as though we're wrapping up anytime soon, but there is a clock now. And I think the fact that there is a timer before something happens is kind of distracting everybody from the fact that nobody really knows what's going to happen after that timer. So we are in the final arc of the Tater Tots campaign, that is true. But we're also, 100 plus sessions in, and we're just now getting there. So that should kind of give you an idea of roughly how long we have left. It could be a lot longer. It might be a little bit shorter than that, but by no means are we going to do like some big time jump to the end and just cut off everything that's been cooking around. But there is a follow-up to your question of, if the campaign is coming to an end, would you be open to making some one-off after the campaign episodes? Dee and his dad going on a mission, CJ taking down Team Rocket, Milo helping the family business, and the Evander and Eve's side mission, etc. So as of right now, I have no big plans to do more Tater Tot adventures after we're done with the campaign. If the Tater Tots decide that those are things they want to handle with the time they have left or afterwards, etc., then absolutely, that's something that we would do. But once we kind of close the curtains on the Tater Tots campaign, we are looking to the future and to do some new stuff. We want to do more things and more new things and all that. So whatever the Tots decide not to invest their time in, that'll be, something that we discuss when the campaign is over. We've alluded a couple times to the sort of Pearly Gates Q&A, where I'm just going to let the players ask any of the questions that they've had, and we'll open that up to you guys as well. We'll probably do a couple of those really big group Q&A sessions where we just talk about everything openly, and then we can kind of unpack this whole game as it has been. You have another question. It is my understanding that while Ragnarok wasn't a one-to-one correlation with the Tots, it was sort of an establishment of the Prime Mind. Was this before or after the War of Succession, and the War of the Architects lasted 300 years? How big of a time period was there between each war? The Ragnarok campaign is the end of the War of Succession, and it begins the War of the Architects, which we do have plans to dive into after the Tots campaign wraps up. It's not going to be a big mega production. It's going to be somewhere around the length of Ragnarok if we pull everything off appropriately. So don't worry too much about the War of the Architects. We do intend to dive into that point of history in a Ragnarok style short run campaign. So stay tuned for that. More to come on that. We've done a couple world building streams and stuff, and some of them are related to that, and some are related to some other stuff that are just nice brain exercises. When that starts to get a little closer, we will probably talk about that a lot more in depth. We've got some questions from Bookworm. We have a big lore question. Right now, the moon is highly relevant, but when the topic was introduced, it was in the context of a battle against the sun. So what I'd like to know is why there doesn't seem to be much activity from the sun entity. Did it already lose the conflict, and that's why the moon has gone loony? So the conflict that is mentioning, that question, is in the context of a children's book. So do take it with a grain of salt, because it's hard to say if anything from that story is actually true. That is just something that's been mentioned in a children's book that Ben and I made up on the spot in a session. So take from that what you will. And you have a follow-up question. Tom mentioned making a Magnezone. How literal was that statement? Can we learn a bit more about the mechanical/artificial Pokemon and how they work in the world? So it's not a super literal answer. Making in that context was definitely a shorthand for Ben and I to contextualize breeding a Magnezone. But in that regard, I would say artificial Pokemon are probably constructed. That would make sense to me. Like a Magnemite or a Klinklang. Similar critters are probably built by others of the same type or potentially by engineers. But I don't really know. This is kind of the most that I've thought about it, because there are implications either way. But I don't imagine them as like a sort of Grey Goo situation where like Magnemites will just make Magnemites until they're out of things to make Magnemites out of. But it makes sense to me that they would sort of self-replicate in that regard. They are robots of a kind. But moving on down, Jamel Commodore. How do you handle the large combats with more than 10 units and keep everyone who is playing engaged? It's really hard. We all struggle with it still. I found that the best way is to make sure that the initiative order is visible to your players and make sure that they know who is on deck and what is happening in the meantime. While somebody is planning what they're doing on their turn, tell the next 2 or 3 people what's going on and be answering rules questions while somebody else is deliberating. It just keeps everything flowing better. If you've got people that are on their phones or they're kind of in and out of the combat, it will bog things down. So I go out of my way to make sure that everybody knows, okay, hey, your next Pokemon that's going to move is this guy. So, let's say, okay, Winter, you're going to be on deck, but you're 5 Pokemon out. So be thinking of what Winter wants to do and be mindful of how the battlefield is changing in that time. I also encourage the players to talk to each other when they're planning their turns. which, yes, it does take a lot longer, but usually for the episodes, that usually just gets cut out, so it doesn't really matter. So you guys don't see a lot of the sort of table talk discussions. We try to just cut to the action. So it might seem as though everybody's fully engaged all the time, but I promise you, combats are... They're a bit of a slog sometimes. They definitely can be, but the more information everybody has, the smoother the process can go. Joshua Mark, you have a question that I'm going to try to answer, and I'll explain more in a second. How do you treat encounters for trainers that want to specialize in a certain type? For example, Milo has a lot of birds that are meaningful for a specialist, so how much goes into planning for those encounters? So I think this has to do with having a bird Pokemon encounter planned specifically for Milo or something of that like. It's pretty rare that I'll just design an encounter in a vacuum unless it's meant for a random encounter table. So if I have an idea for a random encounter table, it's usually just that. It's a random encounter, and wherever the story goes from there is entirely up to die rolls and player interaction. Whatever, if they're not interested in the random encounter, they solve it by looking at it and then they move on. But if I have something in mind specifically for a player, I will usually try to make that critter stand out in a certain way to encourage an interaction with a specific player. But most of the time when I've done this, either all or most of the players will not be interested in that Pokemon, and they'll just roll on by, and then they'll really lock in to like a random encounter. So I don't typically design things with the player characters in mind too much these days, because I'm usually wrong when I assume, okay, here's a bird, Milo will love it. He might, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to catch it or interact with it for a long amount of time. So I try to just put my efforts and energy into more important story beats and let those random encounters be what they're going to be. And that might be everything, it might be nothing. So hopefully that's kind of what your question was about. Half Divine, how would you do items like X items in battles? Would you treat them as a held item or maybe have them be used before? I was thinking it'd just be a good boost to a stat given before or during a battle. For example, X speed would give plus 10 to 15 feet to your speed for a minute, while an X attack would give you like a plus to damage. I'd love to know what you think on them. So I do have some ideas and some frameworks for the X items. They would definitely be used by a trainer during the fight, and they would probably add the Pokemon or the trainer's proficiency bonus to either damage, AC, attack rolls, saving throws, etc., depending on the item. X speed, I would probably do something like 5 times your proficiency bonus additional feet to your move speed. So that could get kind of nutty, but when you're at a high enough level, it's not going to matter if you've got 60 extra move speed if the arena is 30 feet wide. So I'm not too worried about that one. A dire hit would just let you crit on a 19 to 20 and things like that. So I think you and I have a pretty similar idea on how to handle those items. Bringing us on down, Trevor Tube, you've got some more questions down here. How do you feel about the new Paldean Wooper that was announced? I think you guys already know the answer to this question from me. Wooper's Goth era was overdue, and I love them. I think they're great. I'm very excited to see where that goes. I love it. With the downtime sessions, team members like Slurp and Wimpimble, we stan, were showing up more in the background as they aren't used too often. Will you keep using them more often now that downtime is over? So I made sure to mention as much of the squads as possible in downtime just to help populate everybody's activities, and because the players told me what their teams would be doing. So Slurp and Bark were going to seek out other teams and train. Wimpimble was going to scout around and practice casing a location, so I snuck those guys in where I could. Will we see more of them is not really up to me in the day-to-day strokes of a session. If they're not in the manor and they didn't bring the Pokemon with them and they're not in the PC network, I can't force them to appear because it just sort of wouldn't make sense. But everyone does give everybody else enough grief about their unused team members, and we do stan Wimpimble. So I'm hopeful that we'll see more of this guy. Who can say? How are CJ's ghost powers handled now that the tombstone is gone? I thought he kept some stuff, but I'm not sure anymore, and I would appreciate some clarification. Thanks again for making the Cacnea line, and I'm excited that the lab series is going to continue. Dude, the Cacnea line was a lot of fun to make. So let's talk about CJ's ghost powers, because a lot of you have questions about this. Jordan has questions about it all the time. Let me clarify as much as I can here. CJ's powers will never increase or return without the tombstone. He gave that away. A lot of the abilities he had gotten with the tombstone left or were substantially diminished when he gave it away. Anything that's left over with him will eventually fade, but everything that he put into that tombstone will never come back. That was the deal that he struck. That was the bargain that was made with the tombstone. Lots and lots of power, but it's taking some of your life force. Now, he had a lot of crazy abilities. He gave the tombstone away, lost most of them. The rest will fade with time. Moving on down, Gabriel Vogel has a similar question to the questions up above. Since something akin to a final battle is coming up, will that be the end of the campaign, or do you plan to do something with Necrozma after the whole Lunala thing? Also, I was half expecting the Gravetender to be a Spiritomb or a Marshadow. One more question, what happened to the Tangela Pokemon trainer? So again, we'll tackle this one in pieces. Will a final battle mean the end of the game? Not necessarily, no. If the Tots have more stories to tell, we might keep it going, but right now I have no plan to introduce like another legendary or mythical thing as its own self-contained arc. So a Necrozma showdown is sort of unlikely, but it's worth noting the game isn't coming to an abrupt end anytime soon, and just because we're in the final arc doesn't mean we're wrapping up in a few weeks, doesn't mean that things won't change on the way there. They might fumble their way into an Act 4, I don't know. If I was a future seer, I would have planned the campaign much better, because I would have known all the chaos that the Tots would get into. So, what happened to Wyman Coover? I can't say, because we might run into them in the future, and we'll all find out together. I know a lot of you are worried every time there's a big calamitous world event that Wyman Coover is in danger, but I regret to inform you this is not Wyman Coover's story, much as we wish it maybe was. So the only way I can talk about that is if we find out as a group or when the game's over. But he's a tough guy. He's a tough guy. He's got a couple badges. Who knows? Omega from the Discord asks, what are the odds of a Violet or Scarlet playthrough akin to the Sword and Shield playthrough? I would put it on the higher end of likely, but whether it would be a YouTube series that gets edited or just run on Twitch and the VODs go up on YouTube, I don't know. I'll see where we're at productivity-wise when the games actually come out. If I can keep up the momentum and sort of be ahead of the curve for getting sessions done way in advance, then we might do an edited series. But it is pretty likely we'll do some kind of playthrough in Violet or Scarlet. Moving back over to the YouTubes real quick for the last couple here. Steadfast Scout. I don't know if you can give me advice, but I'm going to be trying my own Pokemon DnD campaign, and I've been going over character ideas, most of which are pretty standard. I've got the son of a breeder, the daughter of a family baker, and 2 Team Rocket grunts. I'm really worried that the grunt players are going to try to spoil everyone else's fun. I'm kind of hoping they let some character growth swing them away from full-on Team Rocket. I guess what I'm getting at is how far would be too far for them. Thanks for any help you can offer. So, obviously it does depend on these players. If the players have chosen to play Team Rocket grunts to be disruptive, that's a conversation you need to have before you sit down to play. If they are sitting down to play like full evil campaign and the other 2 want to play a good campaign, you're gonna have conflict immediately and the entire time. So my usual advice, if somebody wants to be evil, quote unquote, or literally if they're like, yeah, no, I'm lawful evil and I'm playing a murderer, you have to have a conversation with them early on that those traits are never applied in a way that is destructive or disruptive to the other members of that party. Because they're not going to travel with you if in every encounter you're trying to steal everyone's Pokemon and you're also like bullying the son of the breeder or the daughter of the family baker and you're supposed to be traveling along as friends. That's a conversation you need to have very early on. And again, because this is sort of the spoiler episode, spoilers for CJ's whole arc, CJ managed to pull it off without being disruptive. Is and was a person with ties to an evil organization, never let it come between him and the other players. He kept it a secret, and we had this awesome big reveal moment, and it was a lot of fun, but it was never a point where he was using that to hurt the other player's fun. So that is something to make sure that you have ironed out fully before you sit down to play session 1. And if they're looking to not have that be a secret part of their backstory, have that discussion with all of the players, make sure everybody's okay and understands what that means to them. Because if you go in saying, yeah, they're going to be Team Rocket grunts, but they're probably just going to be like a little bit of a bully when they get into a trainer fight, they might press for more money, and they're like, no, I'm going to like beat people up and steal their Pokeballs. You got to have that conversation early, because if you don't know what they're doing, and they don't know what they're doing, and you all think that they're going to be doing something different, the first time they do anything, you're all going to be confused, and it's going to lead to frustration. So my best advice I can give you in so many words is just talk about that before you start, because if you sit down and play, it's going to cause problems 99 times out of 100. So let's jump on up here. NWR Tank Engine. So we're not talking about how Wadsworth can talk now. Is it like telepathy or something? It is exactly telepathy. It is telepathy in the most precise terms. He just speaks into the mind of only Milo or another Pokemon. So that is a thing that Wadsworth can do. And tying us back into Tom Woods being commissioned to make a Magnezone. I gotta know, are the Pokemon at the Woods estate being forced to breed, or are they consenting? That's a very difficult moral question to answer, and maybe someday somebody will ask Tom Woods how that works, or maybe we'll get into that. But there is a Ditto on the ranch, and they do bring in a lot of Pokemon to breed, so who can say? But that is all the time we have for normal questions here. We are now going to discuss a Pokemon line. So we're gonna hop over here to the ye olde Pokedex, and we are gonna look for someone fun. Let's build a bug once more. I know. We had a little discussion. I tend to make the bug Pokemon worse than others, so I'm gonna do that again. Just brace yourself. Let's talk about Larvesta and Volcarona. They are firebugs. Larvesta and Volcarona have the same abilities. They have Flame Body, an attacker that makes physical contact, takes fire damage equal to your proficiency bonus. And Swarm, if your HP drops to 25% or below, and you would then deal bug damage, you deal an additional die plus your proficiency bonus, bug damage on any attacks that you make. So those abilities don't change from Larvesta to Volcarona, but now that we have covered that, let's start with Larvesta's move pool here. Obviously, it's a little bit limited, but we're gonna play with it as much as we can. And again, keep in mind the templates for the newer Let's Craft a Pokemon are intended to be, this is like a level 1 version of that thing. So if it seems like it's a little bit weak at first, it's kind of meant to, because I know I roast bugs a lot, but this is a fire bug, so it's immune to being roasted. Flame Charge, plus 4 to hit, 1d6 fire damage. You can move up to your speed as part of this attack, but it's got a 5-foot range, so you don't have to move, but you could. Bug Bite, same deal, plus 4 to hit, 1d6 bug damage. If the target is holding a berry, you may eat it as part of this attack. I like to put those little flourishes in there just in case. It could make for some interesting moments in a fight. If an enemy Pokemon was holding a berry, that would be a cool moment for the Larvesta player to then just get to eat the berry. We have Amnesia. As an action, you gain a +1 to your AC and your saving throws. You can stack this effect up to 6 times because it's a setup move, and it lasts for 1 minute. I've gone back and forth, and we'll talk about it a bit when we get to Volcarona, of how to handle a lot of these moves that kind of just give you an inordinate bonus. But I feel like you should be rewarded, because if you can set up to +6 in a Pokemon battle, you kind of deserve to sweep with a Weedle or whatever you're doing. Struggle Bug. A DC 11 Constitution saving throw. You got a 15-foot cone. All critters in range got to make that save, or they take 1d4 bug damage. Again, with AoE stuff, especially early on, I usually keep the damage die pretty low because it could hit a lot of things. And when you're in a combat with something that has like 8 hit points, taking 4 to everything is pretty big damage. But let's jump on down to the meat of Larvesta, the stats. Let's talk about them. 11 AC, 8 hit points, 2 proficiency bonus. We've got a 15 in strength, a 12 in dexterity, and 11 in constitution, 10 in intelligence, 11 in wisdom, a 10 in charisma, and a 25-foot speed. It is a small creature, and depending on how you handle bugs, I typically have it be implied that the bug has a sort of climb speed, depending on the surface of what we have. But let's take our Larvesta, and we've been training it for a long time. It's ready to go, and now it's a Volcarona. Flame Charge is going to become Fiery Dance, the signature move of the line. We're jumping up to a plus 10 to hit. This guy gets a lot stronger. We're doing 3d6 fire damage now. It's a 15-foot range. If you critically hit, roll doubles, or the maximum amount of damage you could deal, you gain a plus 2 to attack and damage rolls for 1 minute. It's one of those potential to raise your stats moves, and I'm a big fan right now of the critically hitting or rolling doubles on your damage dice, giving you a reward. I love that. That's my new design niche right now. So I threw it on here as well. Bug Bite's going to become Leech Life. Plus 10 to hit, 2d6 bug damage, and you regain the higher damage die rolled as hit points up to your maximum. So instead of regaining a set amount of hit points or whatever, if you roll a 4 and a 5, you're going to get 5 hit points back. Just minimizing the chance that you're gaining 1 or 2 back. You've got 2 dice that could be better. Amnesia is going to stick around, but it's going to have double the effect in half the activations. So as an action, you gain plus 2 to your AC and your saving throws. The effect can stack up to 3 times, but lasts still for that minute. So it only takes you 3 rounds of combat to get set up to plus 6, instead of the 6 rounds for Larvesta. And then Struggle Bug is going to become Bug Buzz. So similar deal, but a 30-foot cone. Everybody's got to make a DC 16 Constitution save or suffer 1d6 bug damage. I could be persuaded to make this 2d4, but again, we're not looking to break the bank in the design space. That's more to be tweaked as the player goes along. So back down to stats. The AC has jumped up to 13. We have an arbitrary 84 hit points, depending on the level that you are and your Constitution modifiers, etc. Proficiency bonus of 4. Our strength goes down to 12, but our dex goes up to 17. Our constitution goes to 15. Our intelligence is 22, wisdom of 19, and charisma of 17. We have no normal speed, but we do have a 40-foot hover speed, and our size becomes medium. So Larvesta has a lot of like high attack stats, and nothing else is really remarkable. And then Volcarona's got like insane offense and defense capabilities. So I went a little overboard with it. And we did the normal stat crunching, and it turns out to have, a 22 intelligence and a 19 wisdom. That's pretty terrifying on a bug that's on fire. But I'm curious how you guys would build a Volcarona or Larvesta, how your design space differs from mine, because that's always fascinating to me. Because these things are designed in a vacuum. So I love to see a couple extra... a couple extra designs of it, shall we say. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Professor's Lab. Next week, we are going to have a very fun talk about some hot topics for DMs out there. We're going to touch on things like DM resentment from players, metagaming, how to make exciting, memorable moments, how to handle the tone of your campaign, making cool and fun NPCs, how do you balance people that like the RP aspect of the game versus combat. Now, originally that was going to be the episode that came out this week, but there's just so much to say about that one. I'm still working on the script, so we jumped the gun. But all of that to say, I hope you all have enjoyed this episode of the Professor's Lab. As always, feel free to drop your questions, comments, clarifications, concerns, anything like that in the comment section of this or any of the lab videos, and I will touch on as many of them as soon as I can. But thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye-bye!